Now we're ready to work on section 6. Section 6 has both some medium weight chipboard listed, and then on the lightweight chipboard page there's some lightweight chipboard that you need as well. And then we have a template that shows how to cut the gable ends, and then there is one box opening on one side. So we'll get started by cutting our gable ends. Like most of them, it is mark a center line, come down 3/4 of an inch, connect those dots, and cut the gables. So I'll do that on both pieces. Now I have both of my gable ends cut, and I'll just put one of them to the side because we're only going to cut a hole in one of them. And here what we want to do is we'll draw some 1/4 inch borders going up and down, and come an inch from the bottom, and then there's a measure line here. We'll make a little mark at 4 1/4 coming across, and then come up 3/4 from that, so the total height of this opening is 5 inches. So I'll make those marks and then come back. So here are my marks. I've drawn in 1/4 of an inch from both sides, an inch up from the bottom. Then on the outsides I measured up 4 1/4, and I extended my center line down from the top, and I measured up 3/4 of an inch from there to the center line here, so that this total distance from the bottom to the peak here is 5 inches. And then I'm just going to draw a gentle curve, kind of like we did once before, and you can either draw it on one side and then make a tracing, and so that you get it exactly the same on the other side, or just freehand it. So there's my curve for the top, and I can cut out my shape. So there's my shape cut out of the large side. Then I'm also going to take a moment to cut the gables on my dormer. The dormer, the front is longer than the back, but we'll cut the gables on them the same way. Find the center point, and then measure down 3/4 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, and cut the gable on each one of those. And that's our prep for section 6. Next we'll work on the box, and as usual we'll start with our vertical pieces. They are sized to match the length of the straight vertical here, so we'll start them even with the bottom of the opening and put one on each side. Once that has set up a little bit, we can put the bottom piece on. Then I'll let the glue on these 3 sides set up really well before we work on the curved piece, so we don't put any strain on them while we're working on that curved top piece. Now that my glue is set up on the sides, I'm taking the ceiling piece and running my fingers along it just to curve it a little bit, and then I'll put it even with the top on one side and curve it around so that it matches the curve, and then make a little tick mark where I need to cut it off so that it will be the right length. Now I've cut a piece of black cardstock that's about 4 3/4 inches long. You want it to be at least an inch longer than however long this little curved piece ended up being, and I'll put score tape on one side on the whole entire side. Then I'll take the cardstock and remove the score tape backing and center it on the inside curve of this piece of chipboard. I'll give that a good burnish, and then take my marker and go on both edges of the craft colored chipboard so it's black. Now I've run some glue along the inside edge of that curve and also on the tops of the side pieces, and then I'll fit this piece inside. The end of the chipboard will butt up against the end of the side here, and the the cardstock will join to the inside of the side. And I'll just work my way around. Once I have it in place, I'll just hold some pressure on it so that the glue can set up and hold it in the right position. And then this is my leftover piece of skinny strip, the 1/8 inch strip that we used before on the curved top of the window. And I'm just going to cut a piece that goes almost the entire length here. I'll put some glue on it and attach it right on that top edge just to give us a little more gluing surface. And then finally we can put our back on. It's just a rectangle. It's the correct width and it should be the correct height. Just line it up at the bottom and put that on. And just hold a little pressure on there until the glue grabs on. And that completes the box for section 6. Before we join the sides together, we need to do a little prep. First, on the 2 gable ends, on the wide ends, I'm going to connect the bottom edges and draw a line straight across. Now that we have our lines drawn, we can add some ledger strips. I've cut 4 at 2 3/4, and I have cut 4 at 1 7/8. Now the 1 7/8 are the same width as the narrow sections, and when we put them on, we'll always hold them back 1/16 of an inch from the edge, but they should go edge to edge. And they should not go longer. If you need to do a little trimming, go ahead and do some trimming. So I'll put the 4 on the bottom down here, and I should say that the 2 3/4 ones just get centered in between the 2 sides. Then once I have those 4 on, I'll flip it around. And again, the ones on the narrow section will fit edge to edge, but we'll hold them back 1/16 of an inch from the top edge. And then the 2 3/4 ones will again be centered side by side, and they'll come 1/16 of an inch below that line that we drew. Once you have the ledger strips on for the base and the top, we'll put the 2 wider sides aside, and then I've cut some for the to go on the narrow sides at 6 inches long, and these will go right up against the edge to give us some extra gluing surface. So I'll put those on both sides of the 2 narrow pieces. So after I got all of the ledger strips on, I gave them a good burnish with my bone folder, and now I'm going to lay down glue on this edge of one of the narrow sides, getting it on both the long side and that ledger strip we used. And then this is just down on top like we've done before. Make sure your bottom edges are straight. Put some good pressure on that to get it started, and let that side thoroughly dry, and then you can put glue along the long edge of the other narrow side and put it on, and then allow both of those to thoroughly dry. And once the 2 sides are thoroughly dry, we can go ahead and add on the other wide side of the building and then let that thoroughly dry. Once the walls have dried, I'll run a bead of glue around the ledger strips on the bottom and put the base in, and then flip it over and run glue all around the ledger strips on the top and fit the top in. So I've got some rubber bands around to help keep it in place, but I'm also just using my fingers and making sure that everything is staying close to the sides of the base and the top, so that I know this building will be perfectly rectangular, and it is a 3 1/8 by 2 inch size, so you can put it on your gridded mat and make sure it's nice and straight and square, and then you can just set it aside to dry thoroughly. Next we'll work on the porch base, and I have the 4 long sides and the 2 short sides out, and I'm going to take the 4 long sides and join them together with the butt joints and cardstock joining strips. I won't put them all, I'll just leave them flat on the table and leave 1 strip on the end and not put it, join it together to make a rectangular solid quite yet. So I'll go ahead and put those on. Now we're going to, in a minute, join this to make it into a rectangular piece like this. I want to first check to make sure that none of my cardstock joining strips are overhanging the end, and you can just miter back the last one a little bit if you want to, but this should be a nice square edge on both sides. So I've got a couple little teeny overhangs, but I don't want to have any of that, so I'll just take my craft knife and run it right along that edge, and now I have a nice clean edge there, and then I'll just come and kind of miter those two with a little angle, and now I know I won't have any problem when I go to join that. I gave it a good burnish. And the other thing I want to do before I join it is that on 2 sides here, let me just mark with a chalk pencil. And this side, these 2 sides, I don't want to come with an end that doesn't have a joining strip on it. I'm just going to cut some little 3/4 inch pieces of ledger strip and put them on where I just marked these 4 X's, holding them back 1/16 of an inch from the edge. And that'll help us give a landing area for our little end pieces. So 3/4 of an inch, hold them back 1/16 of an inch, and center them in those places. Then I gave those 4 a good burnish, and now I can remove this last backing paper and put these together. You can just butt those 2 ends together and reach in there and give that last strip a good burnish. And then our little end pieces are sized to fit right inside of there, and because we put those ledger strips on 2 sides, it'll be easy to put them in. We'll run glue on the ledger strips and along the inside of the sides that don't have them as well. And then just fit that down inside. And I'll just wrap some rubber bands around it to hold it while it's drying, and that's all we're going to do with the little porch base for now. Next we'll work on the porch roof, and it's a square of lightweight chipboard, and it's 3 1/8 inch square. It has a bendy side and a stiff side. I'm going to put the stiff side against the numbers, and then I'm going to score it at 1/2 inch and 1 3/4. So that was 1/2 and 1 3/4. Then use the edge of your table or something sharp to make those creases, and then reinforce them with your bone folder. Now I'm going to do a couple of things now that I've got this creased. On the inside, I'm going to just take my marker and for the last 1/4 inch or so on the 2 open ends, I'm just putting some black down. We'll put a little bit more on in a minute, but that's what we need right now to start. And then I'm going to take a joining strip and I'm going to join it to this larger side. So now I have this joining strip on, and I want to add some ledger strips before we put it together, and I think I'll cut them about 3/4 of an inch, and I'm just going to put them on the long sides, and I want to hold them away from this crease. So put them nearer to the little 1/2 inch flap and to the end where we have our joining strip. They don't have to go right to those ends, but just keep them away from this because this will be a very tight area down here. So I'll cut 4 of those at 3/4 of an inch and get them installed. So here's my little ledger strips installed, and now I can remove this score tape backing. And I'll just kind of kiss these edges together back here. Just fold that cardstock joining strip down out of the way so it doesn't latch on prematurely. Once you've kind of pinched on both ends, you can reach in, if you have a skinny enough bone folder, or else you can find a pencil or something to give that joining strip a good burnish. Then we can take our marker around these short ends. So to fill in these little ends, I'm just using a piece of scrap, and I've cut it 7/16 inch wide. That's a 1/16 of an inch less than a 1/2 an inch. And then I'm going to come down 1 3/16 inches. That's a 1/16 greater than an 1/8, and I'll make a tick mark. So 1 3/16 inches, and I'm making a tick mark right there. And then I'm going to draw to make a triangle. Well, first I'm going to draw that line straight across. And then I'll cut the diagonal. Just be very careful when you're working with these tiny pieces. I just go gently a few times and don't try to do it all in one fell swoop, and then I have a lot more control over it. Now you should have a nice little wedge that'll fit perfectly inside of there. And if you cut off on the line, you'll have another wedge for the other side. And I'm just going to use my scissors for that part. And now we can just run some glue on the inside. Just give it a little squeeze. Now my chipboard is delaminating a little bit back here, but I'm not worried about that. I'll just put some glue inside of there. Eventually that's going to get covered up. And give it a little squeeze so that it stays square with that corner, and that will make that roof fit in better when we put it on. And just hold it with some pressure until that glue dries. And that's all we're going to do for the little porch roof for right now. Next we'll work on the little dormer. The dormer has a back and a front. You remember when we cut the gable ends. The back is the shorter piece. It's 1/4 of an inch shorter than the front. And then we have side pieces and top and bottom pieces. The side pieces are shorter than the top and bottom pieces. So for the side pieces, I'm going to use my back as a measuring guide. I'm going to take a side piece and line it up so that the top is even with that point on the gable. And then I'm just going to make a tick mark down here at the bottom where it hangs over. And then I'm going to cut an angle. So that's what I have. And I just find that easier to do with scissors. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Line up that corner. Make a little tick mark at the bottom. And then cut that off. So now on my front piece, I want to draw a line that's 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom. 1/4 of an inch up from the bottom. And then on both of my pieces, I'm going to draw a line that connects the bottom corners of the gables. And now we're finally ready for some assembly. I'll put these little guys up here, and I'm going to start with my front piece. And I'm going to run a bead of glue along the edge. And then I'll take one of these side pieces, and the longer side is going to get attached to this glue line, and the pointy end faces the bottom. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. You can let those pieces sit for a few seconds. Now I've run a line of glue along the inside of the line I drew at the bottom. I'm also putting some little glues on the sides. I think you can see that. I'll take one of these pieces and put it in there. And that should also help keep those sides square. And I'll turn it around and I'll again lay a line of glue on the inside of that line and up on the sides a little bit. And take my other piece and put that in there. I'm just going to put some pressure on that and hold them for a few minutes. Now when we put this back piece on, the bottom edge should meet that corner down here, and the gables should line up at the top. So keep your eye out for that. And we'll just run glue on all 4 of these tops. Now I'm using my blocks to line up these gable ends up here. If you don't have blocks, you could just take a ruler and hold it straight up and down, or anything that's straight, to make sure that these gables are aligned. And then we can just set that aside to thoroughly dry. So that's our construction for section 6 to this point. We have the main building, 2 roof pieces that will eventually go on the top of the building. We have a little block that's going to be a porch on the outside, and then the porch floor we still have, and then a dormer, 2 pieces for the dormer roof, and a little porch roof. And we'll just keep all of those pieces together and put them aside for now.